It's your boy Mirage the Assassin. I'm back. Mirage the American. Salute to all the ladies and gentlemen. Tuned in live for the Midnight Mirage again. And we're going to go into some more esoteric hidden history and bring some things to light. I saw in the previous two tapes, it was a pretty good response, so I'm glad you all enjoyed the tape. And hopefully you got to look into and research some of the content and the things we talked about. But in the previous tape, we talked about some of the prophets and we talked about some of the divine national movements. So we'll go a little bit deeper into that in this tape. So what we're going to do in this tape is go deeper into what the American Revolutionary War and what the Civil War is and all the wars that you had in between that, all right? You got to remember that here in North America, our people were, encountered by various groups of Europeans. And these Europeans were, some of them were darker skinned Moors, that looked like regular so-called black people. Some of them were amalgamated tawny or mixed or mulatto Moors. This would be what you would call a mixed person, or somebody who is half black or half so-called white. And then you had the pale Slavs or slaves that came with them that they were used to work on their plantations. You all know these people as being white Anglo-Saxon Protestants. A lot of the people that claim that they were trying to leave out of Europe for so-called religious freedom. Really, these are also some of the people that were used by the dark, bleached out, amalgamated Venetians. And the Venetians are basically a later group of people who descend from, what we'll say the original so-called Greeks, the people in the so-called, Iberian Peninsula or Southern Europe. But anyway, a lot of those people were financing a lot of the wars in Europe. Some of us know them as the 30 Years' War, the 100 Years' War. A lot of those fused between France and the newly, created kingdom of so-called Britain or, London and all that type of stuff. Because you got to remember that back in so-called Europe, a lot of those noble bloodlines of what we call France or Gaul or so-called Germany, Prussia, those are, some of the original stock of where even the later day British bloodlines come from. And also, too, we have to remember that these are the remnants of what we know of as Byzantium. Now, the reason why I brought up the Venetians is because they kind of connect back to those original Orthodox Christian kingdoms, of so-called Europa, all right? So we're going to go deeper into, just some of the, the history of the conflicts when these people came here. First you had the Spanish, the French, so-called Dutch or whatever. And then later on you have the English and some of these other so-called European groups. But when they came here to the Americas, all our people, who are Americans, they were fighting all of them, okay? So you got to remember that the indigenous American people were fighting the French on some fronts, fighting the Spanish on some fronts, fighting the so-called English or the Anglo. We were fighting all these different people at different time periods. And, after some of these wars and conflicts with them, you would have certain treaties, okay? And after these treaties, then it would be, some type of an agreement. And, that would be typically how a lot of situations work. But one thing that you're going to see very consistent is that most of the European powers did not want the so-called United States or those slaves or those pilgrims of those plantations. They didn't want them building their own new empire here in the Western world. That is not why they allowed them over here. They only allowed them over here to work on their plantations, to report back to the king, and basically to pay their taxes, But as far as them, having their own kingdom and all that, that's not what originally what was set up. But just through the natural course of things, this is what ended up happening. And you had some Americans that supported them doing this, and you had some Americans that didn't. So this is where you're starting to have a lot of the divides and the tribes. Because on the previous tape, I also told you all that, a lot of the different tribes of the Americas, North America, even in South and Central America, when they came across these Europeans, they had different, ways they wanted to socialize with them. Some of them didn't want to deal with them at all, and some of them did. And then that's when you start to have that divide. So when you start seeing amalgamated, Cherokees, amalgamated Muskogee, amalgamated Seminoles, amalgamated Wichita, amalgamated Iroquois, amalgamated Virginian Americans. When you're starting to see these so-called mixed Native American tribes, those are just the people that married into the families that just chose to deal with them. you know. So we just, going into some of the situations that was popping. But anyway, going back to, now we're going to go to more so like, let's say the 1800s. We're going to go to the 1700s and 1800s. You had a lot of wars going on called the so-called Northwest Indian, wars that were in the Midwest. You had a lot of wars going on across or along the eastern shores, known as the Yamasee Wars, really. And then you had a lot of wars that were coming more inland, okay, as time went on. And you also had a lot of wars that were going on around the Gulf that they're not talking to us about. Now, there is a movie that's come out with Johnny Depp, and they've created several of them, but they're called The Pirates of the Caribbean. Okay, the Pirates of the Caribbean. So real quick, we're going to go into the history of who are the original pirates, who are the original raiders, who are the original buccaneers, all right? Because let's think real quick on the football team, the Oakland Raiders. And let's also think back on the bad boys of the Detroit Pistons, you know what I'm saying, in the era of when Blackbeard was born, The Oakland Raiders and the bad boys of Detroit, these are two teams that are associated with wearing dark colors, and they are also associated with the skull and crossbone, or also the skull with the two swords that represent the corsairs of the Moorish Barbary, all right? When you see that skull and crossbones, this is an occult sign for Asar, or also for a sign of Asar, or basically, or Hiram Abiff, excuse me. But it represents the sun god in his dead phase, okay? So in the mythological text, when the sun god dies, he basically becomes Saturn, all right? So in Star Wars, that's who Darth Vader is. He represents Saturn. He represents the sun god in his death stage, okay? He represents the sun god in his death stage. And so sometimes you'll see a lot of correlations with Saturn and Pluto when it comes to that archetype. But overall, the reason why you all see so much Saturn symbolism in a lot of these different occult groups, or cult groups, etc., is because Saturn represents the sun god in death. All right. So when you see the skull and crossbones, this is just that Moorish bloodline of those ancient men who were the custodians of those mysteries coming from the ancient Maya, or what you all may know of as ancient Egypt. Okay. So don't forget that there's a book called Stolen Legacy by George James. And he talks about how when, a lot of Egypt was invaded by the Hellenistic amalgamated Roman Empire, some of those Greco-Roman cultures, a lot of the Moors, were really just the custodians of the wisdom, the high priests, the high priestesses. They took the information and they started to finesse it into new, updated forms of knowledge and wisdom, okay? So that's what you get a lot of the so-called religions from, like Christianity, what they may call Hebrew, or what they may call Islam. Those are just those Moors taking that old ancient information from Atlantis and really just updating it, okay? Because as I said, our people, you transcend time, but you just update the culture. So yeah, today you may see us wearing turbans and feathers and fezzes and stuff like that, but you also gonna see us wearing the white tee or some Jordans or some Nikes or whatever else it is niggas that's wearing, So you always update the culture. The ancient always, goes through time with you, basically. You know what I'm saying? So in the modern world, that's why you saw the Nazi party, and the SS, which really was just the police force, you know what I'm saying? The power force of the whole Nazi movement, and what symbol did they use? They used the skull and crossbones. You know what I'm saying? The same symbol as the Oakland Raiders. Like, isn't the Oakland Raiders associated with being a hardcore team, being a team who was very, very, cutthroat fans, etc. Like growing up, my dad used to talk about one of the Oakland Raiders safeties. What's his name? I think his name Jack Tatum. But he used to always talk about him, how he used to just be knocking niggas out. You know what I'm saying? But the Oakland Raiders, that culture was just always known for being tough. Think about the Oakland Raider energy, or the Raider energy that you see behind NWA, the so-called rap group or hip hop group. Now you want to understand, well, why were they into all that Saturn's symbology? Wearing the black and gray, wearing the Oakland Raider, jackets and hats and stuff like that. You know, because of course they were from Los Angeles, but also why does that energy seem to stick with that skull and crossbone like that? Also, too, think back on the football team in Florida, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Okay, think about it, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. All right, so why would they be associating with people in Florida with Buccaneers and pirates and stuff like that? What was going on in Florida or around the Gulf Coast that had to do with piracy and different water wars? Because as I told you all in the previous tape, when you all think about the Barbary wars here in America, you got to think about the wars that were on the creeks. Because when these different foreigners started coming to the Americas, they would use the creeks when they would come inland, and they would come across all these different empires and kingdoms along the shores. Because as I said, the rivers and the creeks, our empires and kingdoms were along the shores of the major rivers and the major creeks that were in the inland mainland part of the, you know, of the continent. So not only did they encounter them along the coast, you know what I'm saying, but they also encountered them when they came inland, you know, and when they would go down these rivers, you know what I'm saying? And then they would come across these entire civilizations that would be off the bank of these, you know, river banks, you know, the coast of these rivers or whatever. So we're going to go deeper into some of the water wars, also known as the Barbary Wars, also known as the Seminole and the Creek Wars that were here in the Americas. All right. So they're showing you why they get, you know, why they get the whole Pirates of the Caribbean, and that's here in the Americas. So don't forget, in the early 1800s, you had what's known as the Barbary Wars. That was between the so-called United States, these, you know, pilgrims here, the Christian Waltz pilgrims, white Anglo-Saxon Protestant pilgrims, when they were fighting against the Moorish Empire, okay, the Moorish International Empire, because they was fighting against it here, and they were fighting against it over in the Mediterranean Sea. And a lot of their boats, when they were trying to go through with their people and stuff, traveling, you know, moving around their Christian citizens of their little, you know, their little countries or whatever, and when they were trying to move resources and stuff like that, a lot of their boats was being raided by indigenous people. You know what I'm saying? Both here in the Americas and over in so-called Europe. But right now we focusing in the Americas, right around the Gulf Coast. A lot of these Spanish ships, like when they say that Cortez and Hernando de Soto and all these different people were coming here looking for gold and a lot of that stuff, they didn't really find shit. And a lot of the stuff that they did find, they're not gonna tell y'all that they were actually killed, and they were actually, that stuff was stolen back from them. You know, and they were looted by probably other pirates and aboriginals here in the Americas. So it wasn't like these folks were just riding around with boats full of gold and stuff like that. Like, it was Nagos and it was niggas plotting in all kind of creeks and swamps and all that type shit, straight plotting on them. All right. So what we're going to do is we're going to do a little reading, and I also got some pictures that I want you all to look at, because some of these Spaniards that they have been telling you all were Caucasian people, they were not Caucasian. Because in a minute, we're going to look at a picture of Hernando de Soto, which was a so-called Spaniard who came into, you know, Florida in like the 1540s, you know, early 1500s. And he came across a lot of the indigenous people of Florida, Georgia, and Alabama. And they basically kicked his ass and sent him west of the, you know, going into the Mississippi. And he didn't get to set up no kind of sites here or nothing like that. So he failed when he came to Florida and Georgia and Alabama, stuff like that. That's why y'all don't see too much Spanish type of settlements. You know, you may see a little bit of it in like southern Florida and certain areas in Florida, but once you start coming into like Georgia and Alabama, you're not going to see it as much, because the Moorish Empire in Southern America, the Barbary states of Southern America, the Confederacy of Southern North America, the southern, you know, so-called states, they stopped them. All right. So what I'm gonna do right now is read a PDF that's on, you know, some Moorish information. We're gonna talk about Fort Negro of 1816. I've talked about Fort Negro before, you know, where Andrew Jackson was basically sent by the United States government, and they started to come deeper into the South to steal land. So when we talk about the American Civil War and the American Revolutionary War, this is what we're talking about, okay? This is what we're talking about. So let's go into this. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to just kind of connect, you know, some of these ancient ties between old Britain and the old Moorish Empire and old America. Because also remember this too. Let's take the Old Testament, when you have Egypt and you have the people of Israel. Different monarchs during Egypt's history had different relationships with the people of Israel. So let's take when Jacob sent his sons into Egypt to get food, and his son Joseph was, sent as his brothers sold him out into so-called slavery, and as Joseph spent time there, he ended up basically becoming a noble in the Egyptian house, and the Pharaoh gave him, power and things of that nature. Then of course his Israelite brothers came back, so you had an Israelite emperor essentially in the position of, the Egyptian monarchy. All right. But then fast forward, you would have the Egyptian Pharaoh during the time of so-called the Exodus, and he was going to war with the Israelites. You know what I'm saying? Whereas the Pharaohs before him had certain peace with the Israelites. All right. Let's take King Solomon, when he had the alliance with Phoenicia, and he had the alliance with Egypt. When he had the Pharaoh, he married the Pharaoh's daughter. Go look in 2 Kings and get this information. So when you look in these different, texts, it's showing you that these ancient empires were dealing with each other. They weren't isolated like that. In the Americas, it was the same. All right. Let's go into this. In the evening, a deputation of chiefs went into the fort and demanded its surrender, but they were abused and treated with the utmost contempt. The black chief, or the American chief, heaped much abuse on the United States citizens, or the colonialists, and said he had been left in command of the fort by the British government, and that he would sink any United States vessels that should attempt to pass it, and would blow up the fort if he could not defend it. The chief also informed me that the Negroes had a red flag and the English Jack was flying over it. Now, this is a report from, as I say, the United States Cavalry when they were going into the South, and they came across a lot of different forts. All right. Now, during like the War of 1812 and some of those earlier wars, you had a lot of different forts, a lot of different military bases that was set up all across the Americas, North America or whatever. And a lot of our indigenous American people were working in league with, like the French, some of us, and then some of us were working in league with like the English or whatever, fighting against the United States. So some of these forts, the British, when they left, we still live because we from here. And really, we were fighting for our land. It wasn't even like we probably too much trusted the British like that either. But nevertheless, we both had a common enemy. So a lot of the times when you see these treaties and stuff like that, it really wasn't because they were cool. It was because they had a common enemy. Because a lot of these ancient ties between the Americas and old Phoenicia, or so-called Europa, by the time the 17 and 1800s came around, a lot of that stuff was really highly disrupted. And those original people we had those ties with, them families were long bleached out, and it was like a whole new people in there really that we didn't know. But anyway, so at these forts, so right here, let's go into this. So it says that the American chief was over the fort in Florida, and the fort was seen waving a red flag and the English Jack flag flying over it. Now, the English Jack, or the Union Jack, is basically the tie from our people over in so-called Europa. All right, the English Jack. And as I said, the original English, these just go back to the original people of the so-called Roman and Greece states, empires and stuff like that. The original people of Gaul, those original kingdoms and empires. All right, so those people just later on became Union Jack, etc. And originally they were so-called black people. But just the first thing I want you to see is that in Florida, when the United States encountered our people, they were waving the Union Jack flag and they were waving a red flag. Now, the first question that we can see is that, okay, if there were two nations or two countries, because only flags are associated with countries and nationality, all right? So if we see the Union Jack was representing Old Britain or Old Albion, and that's who that flag was, then who was the red flag representing? That all red flag was representing the indigenous Americans, all right? So now we're going into the government that our people had here in the Americas. What is it really? Because even I don't have all the answers on this shit. So y'all don't come in the comment section thinking I'm just some fucking guru and I just know everything. I don't. I'm still figuring out shit like y'all. You know what I'm saying? But one thing is for certain is that this is giving us a real good key into things when we seeing this all red flag that was being waved. All right. So let's go into this, right here and see a little deeper into this red flag. The two flags represent Great Britain and the indigenous Moorish Empire. They represented a nation of indigenous Moors. This is the same Islamic empire in the east that Abu Bakr, brother of Mansa Musa, was under when he brought 400 ships to America in 1311 AD. Is it this flag that the chief was flying at the Black Fort in Florida in 1816? Was there a continuous Moorish connection from 1311 with the arrival of Moors from the east that is documented in Africa and America until 1816? The documented dates for the presence of contemporary Eastern Moors go as far back as 700 AD, as we have shown with the inscriptions found from an ancient Nevada school bearing the name of Muhammad as the prophet of Allah. So as I said, these two flags represented Great Britain and the indigenous Moorish Empire, all right? So now let's move on. All right, so now I'm going to read you all a little bit about the brother who was named Abraham, but his indigenous name was Sonoufe, Sounoffe. So that's Sonoufe Tustenugi, Tustenuggee. So that's Sonoufe Tustenugi, all right, also known as Abraham. So we're going to read about him a little bit. Sofu Tustenuggee, also known as Abraham, was a Maroon or a Mo amongst the Seminoles. He was their chief legal counsel and interpreter. It was he who was at Fort Negro in 1816 flying the Moorish flag of the Islamic empires. This is the famous cherry tree that was chopped down. Abraham soon moved west to Oklahoma, and Chief Hilota Miko and Chief Himha Miko disappeared in the Everglades. This was the start of the Penn Secret Society and other secret society amongst the Creek and Cherokee. These are the societies that later developed into the ancient Egyptian Arabic order of Nobles of the Mystic Shrine and the Moorish Science Temple of America. All right. So now some of us want to know, well, what are the origins of the Moorish Science Temple of America? What are the origins of the Shriners? Where did some of these original groups come from? Why were they started? Well, we just broke down right here exactly where they came from. These groups were started during the American Civil War, or what's known as the Seminole Wars. And they were started by those different Seminole aboriginals from so-called Georgia, Florida, Alabama, South Carolina, when they went into hiding after these wars against the so-called United States. Because you got to remember, they didn't really defeat our people in the Everglades. They couldn't even really go up in there like that. You know what I'm saying? You got to remember, these folks was foreign. They weren't from here. All right. They didn't understand the woods of Georgia and the different forests of Georgia. You know what I'm saying? The swamps of Georgia and Alabama, the Everglades and the creeks and the backwoods of Florida and in the Carolinas. They didn't know nothing about this shit. You know what I'm saying? So our people went into hiding. And then what did we do? We took the information, because we're the custodian, we're the Moors. Sometimes they call Maroons or sometimes called Mo. They said that Tustenuggee or Abraham was also known as Mo, the Seminole. Don't you all hear people refer to Moors each other as Mo sometimes? What's up, Mo? You know what I'm saying? That's what it is. But anyway, going back to ancient Egypt or ancient Maya, okay? Didn't I say that the Moors were the custodians of the information when they start burning the libraries of Alexandria and stuff like that and trying to destroy all the ancient Atlantean information and all the history? Well, some of our people took that stuff and they hid it and they updated it and they put it into different esoteric literature. And they had different groups and organizations that were coming together to protect the information, so their descendants could get it into the future one day and use it to raise Hiram Abiff out the tomb. That's why they were waving the skull and bone flag, because guess who their descendants are? It's us. So the groups that they made to hide the information are these groups called the Ancient Egyptian Arabic Order of Nobles of the Mystic Shrine, Moorish Science Temple of America, the Nation of Islam, believe it or not. All right. These original groups were just basically the leftover organizations that go back to like the 17, 16, 15, and 1800s. All the way back to when you had Tecumseh, who was influenced by the Most High or the Great Spirit to come deep into the South to talk to his Creek brethren, his Muskogee brethren in Georgia and Alabama. And he told them that there will be a sign from the heavens that we must all come together as Pan-Americans and fight against these foreigners trying to take our land. And that sign was the Great Comet of 1811 and the New Madrid earthquake of 1812 to 1813. And this is what influenced and gave the inspiration and the motivation to start the Muskogee Wars, the Creek Wars, and all these different, the Alabama Wars, and all these different wars that happened in the South. Because there's no coincidence that a lot of these wars in the South happened after Tecumseh, after he came here. After he came into the South and left, that's when all these wars happened. That's when these secret groups and stuff started showing up. Didn't I tell y'all that there were bands of war prophets that came with Tecumseh from Indiana and Ohio? What did they have up in Illinois? Didn't they have Cahokia, Illinois? So what civilization was Tecumseh really coming from? Could he have been an Egyptian? Could he have been an indigenous American Hebrew coming from Illinois or ancient Egypt, coming down to the South, taking the rivers to come to the South to talk to his people down in Atlantis? And he influenced his people with a spiritual divine movement, a spiritual national movement that led to war parties, that led to people being religiously converted into new spiritual, principles that were taught to them by Tecumseh and his prophets. These were really the same stories that you all read in the Old Testament. Okay? So to wrap that part up, if you want to know where did the Moorish Science Temple of America come from, where did the ancient Egyptian Arabic Order of Nobles of the Mystic Shrine come from? They came from the indigenous American Moorish nationals and warriors that were from the South, that were fighting in the American Revolutionary War, that were fighting in the Civil War, that were fighting in the Yamasee War, that were fighting in the Stono Rebellion, that were fighting in Bacon's Rebellion, that were fighting in all these various wars, the Okmulgee War, all these different wars. And when these warriors went into hiding, because the wars never really stopped, but when these warriors went into hiding, the principles, their ways of life, the things that they had as Jaguar warriors from being in the Aztec culture and the Maya culture, you know what I'm saying? That's what the whole Black Panther thing comes from. Those were a warrior class. Who you think they descendants were? The Creeks, the Seminoles. That's where we get our fighting tactics from. We those same people. So those ancient secrets, you know what I'm saying? That ancient divine spiritual national movement that the warrior uses to influence himself, to keep him intact so he'll know what he's fighting for and he'll know what he'll possibly die for. These secrets they kept, and this is what the shrine is. Okay, so this is what the shrine is, because a shrine is one who protects something holy, right? What do you see the holy prophets of Israel carrying? Don't they guard and protect the Ark of the Covenant? The Ark of the Covenant is basically another form of a shrine. So this is just showing you the connection between the Muslims and the Hebrews. These are the same people fighting for the same cause in the southeast states of North America. And this is proven by Abraham, the Seminole of Florida, who was at Fort Negro in 1816, waving the Moorish red flag in Florida. So don't let them tell you that, Americans, y'all don't have no flag and y'all don't have no government. Yeah, we do. We getting it all back together. We figuring it all out. We putting all the pieces together. But the reason why a lot of the Aboriginal or so-called indigenous people, on this YouTube shit at least, the reason why they can't see what the government is and they don't understand how we, play into the international scale of things, because y'all trying to cut the Moorish thing off. And that's where all y'all's governmental and all that stuff is, and showing you in these treaties how the indigenous Americans or the so-called native tribes, how they connect to all that stuff. And also, let me put this on you. Why do you think that a lot of our treaties were with the British? Because in the 1500s, the 1300s, and the 1400s, those families, those original Albayan families, they were intermingled and married into the Ottoman Empire or the Osman Ali Empire families. So somebody say, "Oh, Blackbeard, you capping. Give me evidence of that." I'll give you evidence of that. Now, most of y'all gonna know about this because this was in you all's lifetime. Let's go back to the 90s of y'all's situation with Princess Diana. Princess Diana of the so-called British monarchy. Now, originally she was married to Prince Charles, I think, okay? But, you know, through all that satanic pedophilia, that pedivore culture that they got going on, you know, she probably got sick of that shit or whatever the case may have been. But anyway, she ended up trying to separate and divorce from him. And long story short, she was about to marry somebody that was a Muslim knight. She was about to marry a man who was part of the Islamic Empire or the Islamic Kingdom. So what you were about to have in the 90s going into the 2000s, which really would have probably prevented 9/11 and prevented all this fake boogeyman war on terrorism, preventing this whole fake Islamic Muslim scare and all this shit that came after 9/11, what you would have had is Princess Diana being married to an Islamic knight or a Muslim. So then that means that she would have converted into Islam, okay? So that means that you would have had Islam in old Albayan, just like you had in the ancient world. But this modern Windsor, bleached out, amalgamated Venetian finance family, they couldn't have that shit. You know, so that's where you had the whole situation with Princess Diana or whatever. Because you were about to have an ancient Moorish marriage, really. You know what I'm saying? They were both bleached out. But nevertheless, if this would have been fucking 835, you know what I'm saying, or the year, 537 AD, this is what you had going on. Except the people would have been both black. So imagine a black Princess Diana from old Albayan or from old France or old Gaul marrying a black man or a Moorish man from like ancient Persia or from Morocco or from Algeria or something like that. And then these two so-called black people that are one's from ancient old Christendom or going back to old Byzantium, and one is from the ancient Moroccan or the Islamic side. All right. And then they're going to have a child. And then now you have a child that represents the merging of those two nations. You see? So this is why I keep saying that during the times of like Atlantis, when the world was shifted and the continents were much different, and when our people had kingdoms and civilizations going on and all these different bleached out amalgamated people weren't really here yet, the world's politics was totally different. You still had conflicts, you had wars and stuff like that, but it wasn't the way it is today. All right. Now let me see. So now the next thing we're about to do, we're about to read in a book called The Slave Rebellions of Bahia, Brazil. All right, we're about to go into a book called The Slave Rebellions of Bahia, Brazil. And we're going to read about some stuff. We're going to analyze it, make some sense of it. And we're going to, just show. I'm going to show you all what I'm talking about. All right. We're going to talk about the American Revolutionary War. All right. And how, just connect to some shit. All right. The enslaved African Muslims, now when they say African Muslims, it's really Moors here, all right? The enslaved Moors were just as a part of the Western civilization as the Confederate insurgents of the quote-unquote slave states were prior to, during and subsequent to the Civil War. In fact, because the African Muslim or Moorish revolts against slavery began as far back in mainland America as 1511, when Muhammad Sanbu led a 2-month insurrection in league with other Fulbe and African Muslims or Moors, and Baton Rouge indicates that the real American Revolution did not begin in 1776 when Anglo-Americans decided they had had enough with their English overlords. But the real American Revolution began and continued from 1511 with Muhammad Sanbu. So as I said, all right, they say that so-called Christopher Columbus representing that Spanish faction, Came over here in the late 1400s, early 1500s. All right. And you also had a French faction that was coming over. All right. And you had a Dutch faction as well. So when this says that the Civil or the American Revolution was happening in the 1511 in the Baton Rouge of the Gulf Coast, this is this Pirates of the Caribbean War I was telling y'all about. This is these, you know, this is the war that I'm talking about. This is it right here. All right. Also, when it says that the Anglo-Americans decided that they had enough of their English overlords, these Anglo-Americans are those Caucasian Slavic pilgrims on the plantations, working for King George III, who was really a Moorish Albayan king. And they got tired of that. So they said, we want to create our own kingdom and our own government here in North America. King George said, no, you're not about to do that. And the indigenous American population said, no, you're not about to do that. So when those people said, okay, well, we're going to fight against the Americans and we're going to fight against King George to try to build our own thing, these are those English overlords that they talking about. So think about it. If they fighting against King George and they trying to go against him, wouldn't it make sense on why indigenous Americans would team up with King George? Because what was going on is that most of these people, when they were running off these plantations, they were running into us in like the mainland and the inland and stuff like that. And some of them were being killed, slaughtered up, raped, abused, and all that type of shit. And then we would take them back to King George, you know. But this is a lot of the history that happened that they don't want to tell y'all about, because it's gonna make the pilgrim people look inferior. But they're not gonna tell y'all about how they used to lead them plantations and they was assed out there in the woods and in the forest, starving for food and all this type of shit, begging us for food and all that. They ain't gonna tell you about that, because think about it. If they came over here on the King George's dime, right, and the only place they supposed to really be is on the plantation, that's only a jurisdiction that he has, you know, ownership over. But if they rebel against him and leave the jurisdiction and try to go off in the woods, where they getting food from? Where they getting shelter from? Where they getting protection from? Who's teaching them about, you know, how to find water and stuff like that? It was the indigenous American population. Because King George and them, they just ran from his plantation. So then do you think that every indigenous population they came across was fucking with them like that? Hell no. They was killing them people and taking them back to that damn plantation. It may have been a small percentage of them that helped them, but them were the ones that later on got fucked over. And right when they got healed up from fighting from King George and running away from him, when them indigenous American people started helping them and giving them food, taking them in their tribes, putting feathers on them and teaching them our culture and all that stuff, as soon as they learned our shit, guess what they did? They turned around and fought against us. That's exactly what they did. So let's read this. It persisted in 1812. Remember I told y'all about the War of 1812. Remember I told y'all about that. Remember the French and Indian War, where these Anglo-Wasp, you know, pilgrims of North America off the plantation were fighting against the French, who were trying to put their ass back in slavery, and fighting against the British and fighting against us, who were all trying to get their ass up out of here. But the only reason we was in it, because we don't fuck with none of you Europeans, but we'll help the French out or the British if it means getting these other folks up out of here. You know what I'm saying? Because that's another thing that they don't tell y'all about, is that the British, the French, they was two-timing the shit out of the United States. And the Spanish, they was two-timing the fuck out of the United States. They would literally be giving indigenous American people in Florida and Alabama and Georgia guns to fight against the people on the plantations, and then turn around and like they didn't do it. You know what I'm saying? That's why they say that during the Civil War, that so-called France was supporting the South. Well, what people in the South do you think that France was supporting? You think it was some crackers? Probably some of them were, but who were the other French supporting? They were supporting indigenous Americans. So let's read this. It persisted in 1812 with Muhammad bin Ali and his comrades' brave military assistance to the Anglo-Americans against the British on the sea isles off the coast of Georgia and South Carolina. Because as I said, sometimes we would click up with the British, sometimes we would fight against the British. So it may have been some groups of Anglo-Americans, or now I'm gonna call them Anglo-Americans, but Anglo-Pilgrims rather, and then we may have showed them a little bit of mercy. They said, look, man, these British, they kicking our ass. Can y'all at least please help us a little bit? You know what I'm saying? And we may say, look, okay, we're gonna help you out a little bit. And clearly you had that going on in 1811 by the Moorish the Moorish American named Muhammad bin Ali, who assisted Anglo-Americans or assisted pilgrims when they were fighting in Georgia and in South Carolina. So these are the pirate wars right here. In the mid-17th century, the impact upon the thinking and lives of African Americans revolutionaries such as Denmark Vesey, who became a Muslim at the hand of the enslaved Fulbe Muslim, David Walker, who became Muslim at the hand of enslaved Fulbe Muslim, and Frederick Douglass, who was a direct descendant of the above-mentioned Fulbe Muslim Bin Ali. It persisted throughout the Greater Seminole War, where African Muslims in confederation with the Seminole Nation fought against Anglo-American control in the Florida Everglades. Let me repeat that. It persisted throughout the Greater Seminole Wars, where Moorish Muslims, okay, they saying African Muslims, but it's really just Moors from so-called Europe and Africa, in confederation, that means in league, with the Seminole Nation, fought against Anglo-American or the United States control in the Florida Everglades. So they telling you right here that during the so-called Seminole Wars, during the so-called Civil War, that you had indigenous Americans who are labeled as Seminoles, who were in league with Moorish Europeans and Moorish so-called Africans, or people, I don't want to say they was Moorish Africans, but they were from the Barbary coast rather, who were Islamic. And that was what we had in relationship. So this is why the Moors of Europe and Africa were dealing with Moors of America. It was Hebrew and Islam. You know what I'm saying? We had a more ancient form of it. You know what I'm saying? And they had more, form of whatever it was they was dealing with. But nevertheless, the root of it was all the same. All right. So then it says that finally in 1864, when Muhammad Nicholas led the Northern Union African Corps into the southern states in their victory against Anglo-American slavery. It is in this light that African Muslim revolts in Bahia, Brazil from 1807 until 1835 must be understood and considered. So what they're saying right here is that a lot of the revolts and a lot of the things that happened in Central and South America, such as like the French Revolution, the Haitian Revolution, these different wars in Brazil and all that happened in like the 1800s and 1700s, it's saying that those wars and those people were inspired by the North Americans who were fighting in Florida, who were fighting in Georgia and Alabama, Louisiana, Mississippi, and they were fighting and freeing themselves up here. And then that just trickled on down. So when they talk about the Holy Crusades or the Holy Wars, this is what I'm talking about, y'all. The Holy Crusades or the Holy Wars happened in North, Central, and South America. It was Hebrews and Muslims representing these Seminoles and these European Moors who were here that probably were kicked out and brought over here as so-called slaves. It may have been a few of them. But when they talk about, people coming from Europe who were kicked out and made into slaves and stuff like that, this is who they talking about, But anyway, it was them who were hooking up with Americans, and we were fighting against these folks in these different wars, So what we have right here is a picture of Hernando de Soto. Here's a picture of him. You can see the text right there at the bottom, Hernando de Soto. But I want you to look very, very close at him. Now, although this is a gray, black and white picture, but you can see the dark curly hair. You can look at his beard, look at the mustache, look at the goatee. Just like a so-called black man, right? Hernando Cortez either was an amalgamated so-called black man or he was a light-skinned, full-blooded so-called black man. One thing is for certain is that he was not a pale, blue-eyed Caucasian person. So when they talk about the Spaniards coming over here, when they talk about the French coming over here, when they talk about the English coming over here, when they talk about the Dutch coming over here, the original people from Gaul, it were so-called black people. So even Hernando Cortez, when he came into the South in 1539, 1540s, when he left his account about how the people in the South, the so-called Native Americans of the South looked like Ethiopians, this is who that was. So these are the Spaniards that came here in 1539. And any kind of pale, blue-eyed, green-eyed people with him, they were slaves, the ones that was sleeping with the pigs and stuff like that, and rounding up the horses so him and his other conquistadors can go out to war and try to take land from us and stuff like that. And then some of them same pale Spaniards, or mestizos or whatever, they would, take them and let them fight too. And then if they conquer some stuff, they would give them some property or whatever. But as far as the Spaniards that was leading the whole charge, they were so-called black Spaniards, so-called light-skinned Spaniards, and so-called mixed Spaniards. But the pale of the white ones, they were up under them. And we're going to close it with this. So that's how the Spaniards look. And then right here is a picture of an American. Now, I want you to look at this American picture right here. Here's a picture of an American copper-colored person. All right? But I want you to pay attention to the feathers on the crown. You see the red, white, and blue. You see the blue, the white, the red. The red, the white, the blue. So you see the red, white, and blue right here. You see the red, white, and blue also on his feathers on his armband and shoulder band. And you see the pearls and stuff like that. So this more than likely is an American emperor. So these are how the American emperors look, okay? So when people like De Soto came here, when people like Cortez came here, they had to find who the American emperor was on whatever area they was at. So it may have been a tribe or a confederacy or a nation, but there was an emperor over that nation or confederacy. All right. So this is an example of one right here. Okay. Also, us here in North America, we would import a lot of our birds and feathers and stuff like that from South America. So a lot of the turbans and feathers and crowns that we would have here in North America, in Virginia or Tennessee or whatever, some of those birds, they were imported from down in the South, South America. And also some of them were here in North America, believe it or not. But this is an American emperor right here, or an American Khan. This is an example one right here. So when I say the Barbary states of America, these are the Moors who was ruling over the Barbary states in America. Okay, this is them. And also some of the Moors are dressed like this, but don't be surprised if you can see this same American with a feather on, with a turban. You know what I'm saying? Dressed like he's in the so-called Middle East. So don't think that he may have always dressed like this. Okay. So I just wanted to show y'all those pictures real quick, and kind of put some images to what we dealing with. And maybe we're going to deal with this last one right here. So here we have a picture right here that says Florida, but it says T or Tamericans. T-Americans, Ta-Americans, Ta-Mary, Maryland. Okay. So Florida is also Tamari or Maryland. All right. So they actually refer to the entire North America as Florida. And here's a picture of somebody who's from Tamari or Maryland. You see the crown, you see the feathers. So this is an indigenous Moor or a Moorish American or an autochthonous American, whatever you want to use, that's from Tamari or America or Mary or Maryland. So this is a descendant of Mary right here. This is a Saracen. This is a descendant of Sarah right here. Okay. So hopefully you all got something from this, presentation. I'm just bringing the people up to speed because we about to go through a wormhole, getting much deeper into this stuff. And I got more content coming out that you'll be able to have personally in your home with you, even when Blackbeard nowhere around. But just be patient with me, and until then, keep your studies up. And just give yourself some time with this wisdom, because we don't know everything, and just realize that you've been lied to. We've all been lied to. People want to separate the Moors from the Americans and the Americans from the Moors. They want to separate the Hebrews from the Muslims, but really we are all one people and it's one community, and it's really all one culture. You know what I'm saying? We all represent the people of ancient Jerusalem. Ancient Jerusalem was a concept that Tecumseh actually had in mind. He wanted to see all American tribes come together and respect each other, even though we had different languages and different religions. But he wanted a Pan-American confederation, all right? And he wanted us to bang on the fucking beast and bang on any foreigner that was come here trying to override our shit. You know what I'm saying? So only real niggas and real niggas, are trying to actually uphold, and make, the vision of Tecumseh come real. You know what I'm saying? Which is just you restoring the American empire within yourself, within your household, you know what I'm saying, within your neighborhood, with you and your homeboys and you and your girlfriend or whoever, you know what I'm saying? And then slowly but surely, it'll spread out from that. But, salute, y'all stay real, stay tuned, I'm out.